So we're going to take a day break from our Swedish Ranger series. It will pick back up tomorrow with the next part of it. And we're going to do a TIK video. The title of it is, "But TIK, if Hitler wasn't a madman, why did he assume Britain wouldn't fight?" If you've seen my TIK videos in the past, you know I like TIK's videos. They are incredibly thought-provoking. He does a lot of research for them. He's very smart. And I don't always agree with where he ends up, but I love the conversation. I love the perspective, and so I really like doing his videos. So I'm curious what the question is that leads into this. You know, normally it's a patron or a subscriber or somebody that's given some long question to him about something. So it's going to lead to Britain not fighting at some point. So let's get into it. Remember, if you like the channel, want to support what we're doing, you can like, comment, subscribe, or join the Discord. I'll put the link down below.
My patron Elon Musk has said, "Hi TIK, thank you for your extremely well done videos in answer to my questions. I always learn a lot from your videos. I am very humbled that you took it out of your busy time to answer me. Thank you. I have a follow-up question regarding the lead up to World War II. I must confess I am not perfectly cleared up on the motive why World War II started, and I will explain why right now. The motive of Hitler acting whilst thinking Britain and France were weak and bluffing hangs by a string. I will explain why in a second. It is highly likely that Hitler seems the type of man who fancies to dabble in thinking about long-term goals, perspectives, scenarios, worldviews, philosophies, visions, fantasies, etc. This fact is clear from Mein Kampf and Hitler's Table Talk. I assume we are both in agreement on this. He does not seem like a short-sighted individual, quite the opposite. Let's assume this quite likely assumption is accurate, and he was the type of guy capable of long-term thinking, planning and perspectives. He must have been aware early on from the start of his economic regime where his economic system was leading. Okay, let me just stop you right there for a second.
Okay, before he dives into this real quick, you'd be surprised. Look around the world right now at some of the economic systems that countries are using. Dig into them. I mean, they really don't take much. Dig into them for a half second and then tell me that these are extremely long-sighted economic systems, because I would argue the majority of the world is using, in regards to their total economic policy between fiscal and monetary, you know, policy and everything like that, they are pretty incredibly short-sighted. But let's see what TIK says.
Hitler believed in the shrinking markets idea, so the current system was going to fail. He also knew that he couldn't implement full autarky until he's taken the land and resources of the East.
So an autarky is just like a closed economic system, one that is completely domestic, right? So that's all that means.
Therefore implements a limited autarky, which doesn't work because autarky never works. And so the economy dies quicker than what he perhaps thought it normally would have done. So, while he's aware that the system is collapsing, he doesn't blame it on his autarkic economics, he has his excuses. However, we need to be aware that the economy of the Third Reich was dying from about 1937 onwards, as Gottsali shows in Hitler's Beneficiaries. In the first 2 years of the Nazi regime alone, the Reich spent 300 times more than it was earning, and its debt grew by 10.3 billion Reichsmarks. In 1939, their revenue was about 18 billion Reichsmarks, yet their expenditure was 36.8 billion. 3.3 billion of that was payment on the interest of the debt, and the only solution to this problem was to go to war and extract resources from the rest of Europe to cover the problem, which is what drove them to war. But Elon Musk highlights a contradiction. If it is true that Germany's economic system under Hitler was due to implode on itself if Germany didn't expand, it therefore means that Hitler was aware of this from early on, and he purposely continued this type of system that he created whilst being aware that he would need to invade other countries in order to keep his economy afloat. Yes, although he didn't necessarily think it was his autarkic economic policies that were to blame. He blames the old system, not the new one, just like loads of people do. So, for example, if we think our current system is A, and we also think A is bad, we therefore conclude that we need B. We then implement B, and B leads to unintended consequences and ultimately makes the problem worse. But instead of blaming B, which we still think is wonderful in theory, we blame A and call for more B. So the problem gets worse until economic reality kicks the rotten structure to the floor. Well, it's the same with Hitler and many other people. Hitler implemented a limited autarky with the intention of going to war to get the land and resources he needed to implement full autarky. But when his economy started to come apart, he could excuse this by saying, well, it's because we've still got too much of the old system and haven't implemented full autarky. And it just proves that the markets are shrinking. So it's a self-reinforcing belief. And the tragedy here, if we think about it, is that he ultimately wanted to do what was right for the German people, and that's a noble goal, but the end result of the unintended consequences of his policies was the destruction of Germany as well as millions of people. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, so to speak. But
there's just no way... God, sorry, I always catch him at a bad time.
Hitler would never...
Okay, there we go. There just isn't really a way to make that sort of system work as a major power. You could make it work if you were dead set on doing things totally different than the rest of the world, not participating in global markets, having the country be, basically completely shut off in all ways. You could technically make this system roll forward. Now, the people living under it wouldn't be in a great position. You certainly wouldn't be this major global power. But if you want to be this major global power, you just can't fit those things together. Everybody needs resources and nobody has all of them. Does that make sense? It's a thing where if you're going to run that sort of system, there are going to be other things that you need. So it's kind of twofold here. You have to go to war to hold the economic system up from imploding because of the spending and the debt. But you also have to go to war because if you're going to really have that sort of system long term, you have to have a ton of land and resources, and basically have your pick of resources. So it's almost like a double-edged sword where both sides are bad. It would be, you couldn't be a major power and do it this way, at least in my opinion. And for both reasons, for debt and resources, you would have to go to war.
Blame himself. He'd blame everyone else first. As the Nazis currently argue, it's Britain's fault for getting involved over Poland. So it's not Germany's fault for gearing up for war for several years and then invading Poland. No, it's Poland's fault, or Britain's fault, or the classic, it's the Jews, somehow. And these Aryans think they're amazing, like they're perfection, and therefore nothing can be their fault, even though it is. We are also saying here that when he signed the Munich Agreement, he knew in advance he will breach it because he couldn't just stop at the Sudetenland. Correct. He stated in Mein Kampf that he wanted the land and resources of the East. He was going east, specifically to Russia, which he believed was ripe for dissolution. And he wrote Mein Kampf in 1923, which was over a decade before the Munich Agreement. So yes, he knew well in advance that he would breach the Munich Agreement. Are we saying that Hitler, a man who was certainly aware of Britain's centuries-long European balance of power policy, since he loved Napoleonic-era history, assumes that he can just conquer European territories indefinitely and get away with it? Are we saying he assumed Britain's balance of power policy since forever just so happened not to be in effect anymore? I believe we both agree the answer to both of these questions is most probably not. Actually, I don't agree with you. Yes, on the one hand, Hitler was...
So before he gets into this, I want to give my viewpoint. The way that I see this is Britain's between a rock and a hard place. And it's not just Poland. It's that they had just gotten out of World War One. Like, for all of these countries, or most of them, they had been beaten down in World War One. The prospect of getting into another major global conflict, another world war, if you will, seemed like the most, asinine, counterproductive thing you could do. And so, if you're operating in a position where you are going to be an aggressor, and I think this is why Hitler specifically is more or less playing a chess game before the real war breaks out. Because he's trying to see how unwilling to even push rhetoric that might lead to conflict the major powers like Britain ultimately are. So when you see him going a step further and a small step further and a small step further, I think that is him kind of pushing on the door and saying, like, and seeing how unwilling for this are they. And then obviously once you have France taken, you might think Britain would surrender then, or sue for peace, not outright surrender, but sue for peace, just because if Germany doesn't invade the Soviet Union, Britain's not in a very good spot. I mean, they are not in a very good spot. You have Germany basically completely controlling mainland Europe outside of Russia, and Britain's an island, not connected to the mainland. And so what are they really in a position to do? And so I think it's a few different things there, but I certainly think that early on he is really trying to see where the line is to gauge how willing for another major conflict a country like Britain is.
was aware of Britain's balance of power policy and wrote about it in Mein Kampf. The traditional tendency of British diplomacy ever since the reign of Queen Elizabeth has been to employ systematically every possible means to prevent one power from attaining a preponderant position over the other European powers, and, if necessary, to break that preponderance by means of armed intervention. But Hitler also explains in Mein Kampf that Britain only wanted to prevent Germany from becoming a world power because that would threaten her overseas empire. That's why she went to war in the First World War, because Germany had built a fleet and was heading west, not east. He says Britain didn't care about Germany going east or becoming a large European power, so he says if Germany makes this clear to Britain, they could get her on their side and go east. What England has always desired, and will continue to desire, is to prevent any one continental power in Europe from attaining a position of world importance. Therefore, England wishes to maintain a definite equilibrium of forces among the European states, for this equilibrium seems a necessary condition of England's world hegemony.
Yeah, but if Germany takes the Soviet Union, you think that Britain views them as not a threat on the world stage? Like, come on now. Think about how massive of an economy and military and everything that would be. They're going east, yes, but Jesus, that would be a massive power. I mean, that for sure is a world power.
He says that France has been strengthened because of the First World War and presents a bigger threat to Britain, and France wants Germany to be dissolved, and therefore concludes, England did not want Germany to be a world power. France desired that there should be no power called Germany. Therefore, there was a very essential difference. Today we are not fighting for our position as a world power, but only for the existence of our country, for national unity, and the daily bread of our children. Taking this point of view into consideration, only two states remain to us as possible allies in Europe, England and Italy. So yes,
That is incredibly optimistic. That is, if you look at the layout of Europe pre World War II, that is, you have to take every right angle to get at the point where you think England would be a really like a true ally going into a major conflict like this. I mean, it is true that nobody really loved the Soviets. But again, if Germany takes the Soviet Union, if they expand east, and of course they're not just taking the Soviet Union, they are taking Czechoslovakia. They're taking everything, right? They're taking Poland. They're everything east. They're taking, and so that seems like a power that Britain would want on the European mainland. Like, really? I don't know. That seems extremely optimistic.
Hitler does think Britain's balance of power policy was still in place, but that he could conquer the East because this wouldn't threaten Britain's overseas empire. It's a misinterpretation of Britain's policy, but explains why he was willing to gamble with invading Poland. So why would Hitler purposely follow an economic course that will unavoidably lead him and Germany to no good? Yet he was shocked when Britain declared and asked Ribbentrop, now what? That's like purposely driving at 150 miles per hour indefinitely and be shocked when you either receive a speeding ticket or have a car crash. Hitler believed that the markets were shrinking and that the only way to save Germany was to implement a limited autarky and then head east to gain the land and resources he needed to implement full autarky. He misinterpreted Britain's stance on the European balance of power and didn't believe they would be serious over Poland. I mean, they hadn't been serious over Austria or Czechoslovakia, so why would they care about Poland? Especially when Germany was going east, which is away from Britain. That's why he was shocked. But Britain isn't just looking to prevent one European power from dominating the world, but also to prevent it from dominating Europe itself. And I've been over this in another video, but in a nutshell, if any country dominated the European continent, even if it didn't have colonies elsewhere, this would be a serious threat to the British mainland because this dominant continental power would have access to more ports and resources and then be able to dominate any naval race that might happen. So Hitler misinterpreted Britain's policy to mean that
That's basically my exact thought process here. And this is my thought process even for World War One, which I've talked about on other videos. I wonder if it's not Germany, if the threat of Germany becoming kind of the major dominant European force, I wonder if it's not Germany in that situation if Britain gets involved. But it's hard to know. Obviously, it's counterfactuals because it is Germany in that position. But you can understand Britain's viewpoint here. I mean, they're a dominant power for Europe, but they remain an island nation with their biggest, their biggest military power, their biggest projection of power, their kind of hold on power and power through money, power through force, power through military is the British Navy. And so you can understand their viewpoint.
that she didn't care if Germany got large in Eastern Europe, when in reality that wasn't the case. Britain did care because a large Germany that conquered the Soviet Union would be a huge future threat to Britain, so it does make sense. Additionally, Germany did not have a war economy. I 100% understand why you believe this, and there will be a lot of people watching this who think the same thing. And the reason why
Let me hear what he says first. I disagree, but let me hear what he says.
is because the narrative from way back in the day was that the Third Reich did not have a war economy until God Emperor Albert Speer descended from the heavens in mid-1942 and got things in order. This was a narrative in loads of documentaries and books, including a very popular one from the 1960s.
Yep.
William Shirer's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. This was my granddad's copy from 1964, which is why it's falling apart. But here's what Shirer says about the German economy. Despite all the plans and all the talk in Nazi Germany concerning total war, the resources of the country had been far from totally organised. At Hitler's insistence, the production of civilian goods had been maintained at a surprisingly large figure throughout the war, ostensibly to keep up morale. And he had balked at carrying out the pre-war plans to mobilise women for work in the factories. So it's no wonder that you and many other people believe that the Third Reich did not have a war economy. This was the narrative that's been pushed for decades, so it must be true, right? But is this really the case? And no, the Third Reich absolutely did have a war economy. Germany implemented a war economy in peacetime. That's why its economy was crumbling by 1937. Rearmament was in full swing as early as 1935, price and wage controls were implemented in 1934, massive regulations were introduced, there were import and output controls, the debt was accumulating even though the tax rate had increased by 25% and then went up even.
Look at what was implemented once the Reich takes power. When the Reich takes power, and I've talked about this before, but there's a great series on World War II industrial factories that's on YouTube. I highly recommend it. It's awesome. All of the historians on it are really great. But basically one of the things that they get into is the transformation of the German economy once the Reich comes into power. And it's a huge transformation. But what is the transformation for? It's for war. It's literally the whole thing is for war. They're building aircraft that are quote-unquote civilian aircraft that are meant to quote-unquote fly mail, that are, they're being done in a way that essentially they could be very quickly outfitted for military use. They are testing them for military use. Like, all of the things that they're doing are for the build-up to war. All of the changes that are being made for the economy are for the war. They have a totally, totally different economy by the time that war breaks out than when they did when the Reich actually comes to power. That is the war economy. Those transformations are the war economy. And I have heard a lot that, honestly, I think it's this idea of like there being good Germans, even could be good high-ranking Germans, right? I feel like this is done a lot with Erwin Rommel. I feel like it's done a lot with Albert Speer. We kind of build these guys up. And with Speer, it's specifically his role in the economy. But you really have to parse truth from fiction on a lot of this stuff that we have done building some of these characters up. Because, yes, what I think is that the whole thing, the German economy turns into a war economy long before war ever breaks out.
Even further later. Between 1933 and 1935, expenditure on the German military increased from less than 1% of German national income to nearly 10%, a bigger and quicker increase than ever seen before in peacetime in a capitalist state. So yes, the Third Reich had a war economy before it went to war. When they did go to war, there was no major change or call up to war in the economy because the economy was already set up as a war economy, unlike almost every other power. Now maybe Hitler did keep consumer goods production higher than some might expect, but there's a blatantly obvious reason for that. Hitler had lived through the German Revolution of 1918 to 1919. There were massive shortages of everything during the First World War, and he saw that living standards had dropped by about half of what they had been in 1913, and how the first street demonstrations in Munich had been caused by an increase in the price of beer by 6 pfennigs a litre. In episode 2 of my Weimar hyperinflation series, I even commented saying, it's no wonder the National Socialists didn't destroy their alcohol stocks prior to the Battle of Berlin. It is therefore understandable why Hitler would want to keep consumer goods production up during the Second World War. He doesn't want another stab in the back myth. But regardless of how efficient it was, or whether Albert Speer increased that efficiency, the Nazi economy was a war economy from the mid-1930s onwards. And I know that goes against what the older books and documentaries claimed, but the reason they're saying Germany didn't have a war economy is because to admit that it had a war economy would force them to concede that it had a war economy in peacetime, which means that they'd have to admit what the economic policy of the National Socialist German Workers' Party actually was, which they...
He finds a way to slide this into every video.
Can't, because that would be unpopular. Thus, they say it wasn't a war economy, which is a blatant lie. And then Numpty here comes along and sticks his neck out and is slammed for doing so because...
Yeah, the industrialists jump on board almost immediately with the Reich. And why do they do that? Well, because Hitler goes out of his way to basically say, this is the direction we're going, this is what we want to do, we're going to have this union between the corporations and the manufacturing and the state, and we're going to do it to ramp up the German economy, to ramp up the German war machine. And so, yeah, it takes off almost immediately. That's why you even have a behind closed doors side deal with the Soviet Union to be able to test military equipment in the Soviet Union because, technically Germany wasn't supposed to be doing really any of this stuff.
He went against the lamestream narrative by telling the truth. Anyway, you can see why this entire paragraph of yours now doesn't make any sense. If you know your own economic system will only survive if you go to war, you would imagine Hitler would have had a much better war economy into his 6th year. It is quite possible that it would have reached such a well thought out preparation stage by this time in which Hitler would afford not to care whether Britain was bluffing or not in September 1939, yet the German war economy does not reflect this, and the situation does not vary much from 1938 until August 1939. He did have a war economy by 1939. Was it 100%? No. Was he completely prepared? No. But he was in a much better position than you're making him out to be. That said, he didn't expect a war with anyone in 1939 apart from Poland, and this is where people like David Hogan will argue that Poland might have backed down over Danzig in 1939 had Britain not got involved. Then Germany might have gone around Poland. But personally, I don't see it. Hitler would have destroyed Poland later, even if they had handed over Danzig, so I'm not convinced by that argument. We have arrived in a territory where things start not to make sense. Logic dictates this. We can tell from Hitler's actions that he most certainly wanted peace with Britain, including from the speeches post-September 1939, having Luftwaffe spread peace promotion leaflets in London, etc. he definitely did not want war with Britain for many reasons, including from the racial perspective, since he considered the British as fine Germanic people. You're using logic, but you've made several assumptions that turn out to be incorrect, so you're coming to the incorrect conclusion, and this is easy to do. The solution is to always ask the question, but is this really the case? Germany never implemented a wartime economy, but is this really the case? Hitler seemingly forgot about Britain's balance of power strategy, but is this really the case? You see? And I know not everyone has the time to dive into this stuff like me, that's why I'm here, but if you do have the chance, and you do come across a problem or contradiction, you got to challenge any assumption you're making and see if you can find out whether that assumption was wrong or not. We can sum it up and take it one by one logically again. We assume it is true that Hitler was capable of long-term thinking. Yes, and it's not an assumption in this case because he actually did throughout Mein Kampf and elsewhere. We assume it is true that Hitler's economic plan was leading unavoidably to economic ruin unless he conquered other countries. Subjective opinion here. A very poor choice of economic plan if you ask me. Surprised a man called by many of his peers post-war a genius would opt for such an economy with such an outcome. Keynes was heavily influenced by Hitler's economists, and Nazi economics is often referred to as proto-Keynesian for that reason. Yet people still believe in Keynesian economics even though it's along the same lines as Hitler's economics. It's a terrible ideology, yet many academic expert geniuses still believe in Keynes, despite the fact his work has been shown to be incorrect thousands of times.
Yeah, I'm not getting into this. Some of the most vitriolic arguments you will ever hear are between different schools of economic thought. I will say I am not on the Keynesian side of economics.
So I agree with you. But just because people believe in central planning doesn't mean they're madmen. It just means they're uninformed. Therefore, by using logic, if both the...
And that was my point earlier. Look around the world today. You can see bad economic policy all over the place. It doesn't prove anything about the people that are implementing it other than they don't really understand economics in the way that they think that they do. I mean, I don't know, in the modern day, I don't know if it's hubris. I don't know if it's because we've complicated the modern system to the point where there's a lot of economists who think all of the rules of past economics are thrown out the window because we're in a new day, that we're in a new age. This is now modern monetary theory, and this is the new way that we view and handle money and all that. I don't know, but there's bad economic policy all over the place. I would say that doesn't prove that somebody is out of their mind. I mean, no more than it proves that, they're some kind of psycho or something like that. Like they just think that it's going to have an outcome that it's not going to have.
Assumptions above are correct, it would be true that Hitler knew his economy leads to the requirement of foreign conquests. Yes, although, again, Hitler believed the economy would collapse anyway and didn't blame his own economics for that. We assume it is true that Hitler is aware of Britain's since forever long European balance of power policy. He was, but he misinterpreted it. We assume it is true that Hitler is not under the conviction that this policy has just ended just because the special snowflake Hitler came to power. Okay? We assume it is true that Hitler most definitely hates the thought of being in a war with Britain. I don't know about hate, but he certainly doesn't desire it. Yet, World War II started because of Hitler acting like an unreasonable blind man, therefore proving at least one of the above arguments false. Yes, and hopefully you now see which are incorrect. Yet Hitler, despite Britain very repeatedly and publicly running out of patience and her repeated warnings and the publicly declared Polish guarantee, something Britain had not done for Austria, Rhineland, Sudetenland or Czech Republic, attacks Poland and is shocked that Britain followed course with her publicly declared guarantee. It's like going in a police station, hitting a policeman and act shocked that you get arrested. My analogies may not be the best choices, hopefully they will not detract an awful lot from the main idea. With respect, thank you very much, TIK. Well, hopefully I've clarified this for you now, but Chris Wilsden actually replied to you a while back saying, "We assume you can if you wish. I for one don't think Hitler was a one-man despot forcing everyone around him to do stuff on penalty of death." He also
That is how a lot of people view it, though. That's how a lot of people view it.
makes the point that Britain was in financial trouble after the First World War, and that public opinion wasn't necessarily against Germany because of what had happened in the interwar period. So Hitler may have seen that and believed Britain would let him get away with things this time around. I think these are good points, but the main problem is all the assumptions being made. Hitler made assumptions and was wrong with those assumptions, but that doesn't mean he was a madman. Similarly, you making assumptions about Hitler's beliefs has also led you to incorrect conclusions. But it turns out that there is a logic to it, and that Hitler's wrong assumptions about Britain's balance of power strategy is what led him to assume he could go east without getting involved in a war with Britain. And his economic policies only reinforced the idea that he had to go east. That's why he had to take the gamble when he did, and it didn't pay off. I hope that makes sense, and I'm happy to hear what you guys think in the comments below. And if you have...
Okay, so that was TIK's video of if Hitler wasn't a madman, why did he assume Britain wouldn't fight? That was interesting. I did not expect that to get into the realm of economics nearly as much as it did, although with it being TIK, I probably should have seen that coming, but I didn't expect it. So that was an interesting viewpoint. God, I have had a fly flying around me this whole video and it's driving me nuts. Anyway, really good video. I agree with, I don't know if I have any disagreement in anything that he said. I think very similarly along the same lines. Everybody kind of has their own assumptions here and there on why something was done a certain way or wasn't done a different way, but like I said earlier, I think that the interpretation that Hitler had of how Britain would react to Germany going east is the most optimistic reading of that situation you could possibly have. It seems too overly optimistic. But anyway, I meant to get this video out yesterday and have the Ranger first part of the last part one of number 16 of the Ranger series out today, but I had an issue yesterday, ended up burning myself pretty good while I was cooking dinner, got oil all over myself and didn't feel like recording the rest of this video last night. So this video is for today. The Swedish Ranger video will be out tomorrow, part 1. Sunday, part 2 will be out, and then that will be the end of that one. So, as always, if you like the channel, want to support what we're doing over here, like, comment, subscribe. Help me keep building everything, and I'll see you all next time.